Olá a todas e todos. Esta é a primeira roda de conversa, uma iniciativa do Complexo de Formação de Professores, reunindo docentes de diferentes redes, municipal, estadual e federal. Juntas e juntos, com a professora Clare Brooks, da Universidade de Londres, iremos discutir pontos de convergência e de divergência em contextos de governos conservadores, no Brasil e na Inglaterra. Iremos focar, por exemplo, no debate sobre a reabertura das escolas, a questão da saúde mental de professores e alunos, possíveis mudanças curriculares que esse tempo nos obriga a repensar. É fato que a Unesco vem nos alertando que cerca de 60% das crianças e jovens de todo o planeta não têm qualquer tipo de acesso a práticas educativas. Então, neste momento, estejamos juntas e juntas, nos preparando para os desafios do agora e do futuro, nesses tempos inéditos. Muito obrigada e fiquem bem.
Could you please share with us your experience about education in UK in this time?
Sure. I've made
Thank you a lot.
I've made some kind of random notes. I don't feel I have anything terribly organized to say, so I'll just kind of say some random notes, and then maybe we can just talk about, you know, whether they make any sense or not. I don't know. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think the first thing to say is one of the situations that we found ourselves in here is, and I think this is the same everywhere, is nobody knows. Like it's this bizarre scenario where we kind of want people to have answers and nobody does have any answers at all. And all we can do is look to other countries, look to other places and find out what other people are doing and then see what similarities there are. So I think first things to do is to kind of think through, well, what has this event told us about the world? What do we know about the world now that we didn't know beforehand? And I think that's quite an interesting exercise to start with. So one of the things that we've learned is that right-wing governments tend to have higher death rates than left-wing governments. And that's certainly something that we've seen internationally. And I think what's kind of interesting about the way that this disease has traveled around the world is we initially thought that it was kind of China's problem. And then it was China's and Italy's problem. And then it became our problem. And then it became a North American problem. And now it's becoming a Latin American problem. And so we can see this traveling. It's happening like this because the different ways that different governments are responding to the crisis. And for me, this seems to fall into two categories. You seem to be getting those governments that put the economy first and are more interested about jobs, and more interested about people going to work, more interested about keeping the economy going. That's certainly the case with our government. And then you've also got those governments that have put people first. And this would be really good examples of governments like Austria, Germany to some extent, New Zealand, places like that, where their priority has been to take care of people and not to worry so much about the economy. Now, at the moment, I think we're kind of worried what the impact our government's approach is going to have on the death rate in our country and on the people in our country. And I'm really interested to see in how a year's time may be, what the impact of the economic decline is going to be long term on groups of people, as well as what we know has been the impact of the way that different governments have responded with respect to things like lockdowns and things like that. I think another thing that the COVID-19 has taught us about the world is, and I've written this down on my notepad, is the real purpose of schooling. Our government has pretended for some time that the real purpose of schooling is about helping individuals, supporting young people, giving them the best opportunities, blah, 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 blah. What we've learned in this crisis is the real purpose of schooling is childcare so that other people can go to work. And all of the discussion about people going back to school, education, those kind of things are all about allowing parents to go back to work, keeping the economy going. So one of the phrases that has been used everywhere is, we are in this together, okay? But we're clearly not in this together. There is clearly factors, geographical factors, that are affecting who is being more affected by this virus than others. The trends that we're seeing is that it's the poor, it's those people who are already sick, it's people, particularly in our country, the diversity is showing that people from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds are being more adversely affected than anybody else. And it's the old, and it's the elderly, so it's people who are over 50. And clearly this phrase, we're in it together, is being used to try and create some kind of sense of unity. But actually what we're seeing is that there is not a sense of unity, because certain people are being affected by this virus much more than others. What we're also seeing is a change in terminology, that people who were previously referred to as unskilled are now being referred to as key workers. So there's a real change and shift in terminology. And the people I mean are people who work in supermarkets, people who are fruit pickers, delivery drivers, those kinds of jobs that we need in order to keep the economy going. The vernacular has shifted from calling them unskilled to they're now being called key workers. This doesn't mean that they're being paid more money. It doesn't mean that they're getting any kind of preferential treatment. It means that they are being forced to continue their work, which is putting them into dangerous situations, whilst other people, people like me, are allowed to work from home, to be allowed to work in much more safe environments, because I'm not a key worker, but I am a skilled worker.
Hi, Claire.
Hello.
Hello. How the schools are working now? The schools are working now, or only e-learning is working in this time in England?
We've talked here about homeschooling, which is not entirely true. Our schools are not closed. Our schools still have key worker children, still go to school, so our schools are still open. Plus all of our teachers are still teaching students, but remotely. But people are using this phrase homeschooling, but it's not true. But what we know is that homeschooling is working best for high-income children who have good access to technology and who have got parents who will sit and work with them and support them with their homeschooling. We know that homeschooling is happening least well, the worst, for the children that need it the most. Children who don't have good access to technology, children who don't necessarily have the home support network, and children mostly from low-income families. And then the final kind of trend that I wanted to mention is we're also noticing a difference between urban and rural communities. So what we're finding in our rural communities is they've got much more open space, people are going out much more, people have got space where they can still socialise and do things, but at a safe distance. Whereas in our urban communities, people are stuck in accommodation with no outdoor space. They've closed parks because people are congregating in parks. So there isn't places for people to take exercise. There isn't places for people to go outside at all. So there's a real urban-rural division that's happening there too.
It's a pleasure talking to you. Sometimes I suppose that when you describe UK, you describe a global situation.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's not a local, it's a global. But at the same time, we live in a country where our president denied the situation. Our government denied this unprecedented event. And at the same time, people together want to think alternative government. But we are a closure situation. We have the unique travel in a nightmare, in a dictatorship. So, for example, we have some numbers, official numbers. 30% of our homes in Brazil doesn't have any kind of technology, any kind of access of internet. 30%.
Yeah.
60%, around 60% of our children and young people doesn't have internet in their homes. So it's the worst situation to start any kind of online education. So at the same time, our schools offers healthcare, offers meals. We have the situation of hungry in Brazil. So the school is closer to state and security children rights. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the point. When you talk about Brazil, we talk about the gap and different kinds of schools and the unequal society. So, but when you show us, we show UK like an equal society too. Teachers in both countries are on the pressures and in the present situation too. So I suppose that we need to compare and think together how geography education can help to a critical thinking in this moment.
Okay, so what I was going to go on to talk about now a little bit is about the conversations that we're having now that we're thinking about opening schools up again, because I didn't know if that would be helpful. And I've divided this into 5 sections, kind of 5 categories. So the first category is for us to think about what has been the impact of schools being closed for this time. So our schools have been closed for about 2 months. So what has been the impact of that school closure? Well, first thing, as I mentioned, is that our schools are not really closed. Children may not be going to school, but they are still being taught and teachers are still providing work for them. So there has been some work going on, although clearly not as much as they would have been having if they'd been at school. The second point is that we know from the period of summer holidays that where there is some learning loss, that affects poor children the most. So there's a real link between the amount of learning that children lose over the summer and their socioeconomic status. So that's obviously very key. We also know that richer children actually do more work at home. So what we're expecting to see is that the achievement gap is actually going to be widened as a result of these schools closing. We also know that for schools, for children who are vulnerable or who perhaps have mental health issues or bad home lives, that school is an incredibly important stabilizing influence for them. And in which case those children may have been in really difficult situations for the past 2 months, even if they haven't been affected by the coronavirus. But of course, they may also have lost family members, grandparents, maybe even parents. And so that's going to have a huge impact particularly on those vulnerable children. And the final point on this is that distance learning or online learning only works if it's good, and it works best with older children. And so therefore we know that the younger, more vulnerable, poorer children are likely to be the ones that will be impacted by this by far the most than children at the other end of the spectrum.
I think in Brazil we live such a dramatic situation, because besides of the illness, the deaths, and the social disease, our government definitely is not concerned about it. They are not concerned about our students' education, about the scientific knowledge, about the conditions of the students. We are completely trapped in that situation because we really don't know how we can deal with that. We didn't implement the distance education effectively in the federal schools here in Brazil. We assume that we don't have the conditions to implement that because we can guarantee that it will reach our students, and I think it's a problem in UK, as you said. So for the time being, what we're doing is sharing some materials, suggesting content in the internet, and feeding the school website with some materials, but we don't expect that the students interact with us, because we can be excluding those who are not connected to the internet. So it's a temporary and frail model that we defend is not replacing our classroom. So we are trapped. We are stuck in this situation. And I think social isolation brings us something that it's quite important to the geographical education too. It's been possible to realize that we don't know the real situation of the social conditions of our students. We are sure that not all of them is connected to internet, but we also know that many of them don't have an appropriate space at home, a quiet space to study, but we don't know exactly who is in these situations and how many are them. So we teach a lot about demographic data and social profile of the population, but we have not produced our own data and of our own school communities. And if we have made that, maybe we now could respond to this situation more quickly. We could claim the authorities to provide material support to those students. Without this data, we think we are completely, we don't know. We don't know what to do. We don't know who they are exactly. The school doesn't have this data. So I think geographical education has to be worried about this from now on. We have to know our students better. And I have a question.
Can I just say, Carolina, I think you're absolutely right. And I think knowing that data is the first thing. Just because people have a mobile phone or connection to the internet doesn't mean that they're engaging in learning. But also, it also doesn't mean that just because they don't have those things, that they're not learning. And I think one of the things that we've talked about a lot is about the real value of the home situation and being with their parents. And even though they may not be learning the curriculum or school things, there is a really good chance that they will be learning other social things within their household that may be of benefit to them. And one of the positives that we've talked about is a kind of back to basics thing, that people have stopped consumerism. You know, people have started going back to real basic things, being with their families, cooking together, eating together, having quite traditional home lives, which has actually been quite supportive. It's a minor thing, but it is something positive.
Yes, I agree with you. But here, our students, most of them needs the school to be comfortable, because at home they don't have a good situation. They don't have their parents, they don't have a quiet space to be alone.
Yeah.
And sometimes the houses are too small for many people. So I have a question about the exams that lead students to the university in UK. Are they being discussed, adapted some way, considering the isolation moment?
Yes, so
they are maintained.
So we have a series of public examinations, which are university entrance examinations. And one of the very first announcements that was made is they were all cancelled, So none of our students are taking any public examinations this year at all, at any age group. And so that's been then a huge problem as to how will we decide who gets into university and who doesn't. And they've decided to do this based on teacher estimated grades. So each teacher has to give each of their students an estimated grade that they think they would get if they had done the exam. And then they have to rank their students, and then those all get sent to a central authority who will then decide who gets given particular grades and therefore gets access to university. So that's how the grades are being decided. The other side of this is many of our universities are expecting a shortfall in billions of pounds because of student fees. So a lot of universities rely on international students who pay much higher fees to come, and they financially underpin our universities. We're expecting a lot of those students not to come, which means that universities are desperate for student fees, and therefore they're much more likely to take more undergraduates onto programs in order to get more students to come. And because we're expecting an enormous recession, we don't think there'll be any jobs out there for young people. So young people will consider going to university and will be more likely to get a place at university than previously. So it's kind of working two ways. We think universities will relax their entry requirements, and there's been this period of teacher assessment, teacher grading, that will be used for university entrance.
Então, eu gostaria também de fazer uma pergunta, aproveitando justamente esse ponto, porque eu acredito que ela tocou nesse ponto das aprendizagens que são realizadas, né, no ambiente doméstico, como sendo uma chave de possibilidade de contato entre os professores e os alunos. Porém, como ela mesma colocou antes, né, muitos desses alunos estão passando por processo de trauma. E o ambiente doméstico também é um ambiente onde se reproduz, de certa maneira, a violência, né, familiar, doméstica, violência de gênero. E é uma contradição, né? Ou seja, se ao mesmo tempo a gente trazer essa experiência da quarentena, da vivência da quarentena, para esse contato com os alunos, por outro lado, isso pode trazer à tona uma série de dificuldades de discussão a nível psicológico sobre assuntos que os professores não têm o domínio, não têm as habilidades para tratar. Então, eu acho que é um debate assim que a gente tem que trazer e discutir mais profundamente.
Se o Pedro permitir, eu queria reforçar assim, que a gente já tem relatos nas conversas que a gente tem fazendo, assim, que a gente tem uma dicotomia muito grande. De um lado, a rede privada diz para o seu professor: não fale sobre pandemia. Você não pode amplificar o trauma. Então, ele é proibido de falar com isso como tema, o que já, assim, como o Pedro falou, já implica né, você está atado para você não... Como é que você não vai discutir desigualdade, né? E a rede particular, isso é muito, né, expressivo ou significativo, né? Ao contrário, na rede pública, os professores que a gente tem ouvido, eles dizem que quando eles conseguem conversar com alguém, eles percebem isso, que ao invés de eles terem que cumprir um determinado conteúdo, eles tinham que estar conversando sobre o que está acontecendo. né? E isso, assim, é quase que tolhido, porque você tem que mandar o exercício do conteúdo, você tem que mandar né, você tem que cumprir o que está ali dito, como é que seja o programa, né? Eu queria ajudar, assim, né, nessa pergunta do Pedro nesse sentido, tá? Posicionar.
Só complementando, Claire, by the other hand, Naíse told us that some teachers of public schools, they make the opposite. When they they talk about the pandemic and the situation, the students can answer, can change the ideas, and they can make the class, okay? So Naíse show us the difference between private schools or middle class, for example, and public schools, the working class. In general, is that difference, and the difference between the way to do these classes, remote classes.
I think all of those issues are so important, and they're like, I don't have any answers. I mean, I totally understand the thing about like teachers not being equipped. You know, teachers are not counselors. You know, they're not necessarily equipped to help young people deal with this kind of trauma. But then on the other hand, if teachers don't, then who do? And I think that it's a really difficult situation to be in. And for me, I think the important thing here is about relationships. You know, what the relationship that a teacher has with a class will determine the extent to which they can have, you know, what conversations they can have, and the nature of those conversations. Now, having said that, I'm very mindful of what you said, that this is a new academic year and they may not know their classes very well and won't have had an opportunity to establish those relationships in the same way that if you've known a class for a while. So I think it's a really difficult thing, and I don't think I would want to say to a teacher, you know, you must do this, because if a teacher's also feeling vulnerable, then that's not a good thing for them to be doing. It's got to be based on the kinds of relationships that teachers have with their students, I think. But in terms of what we teach, you know, I can't see, like, the world is a different place now than it was before. And if we carry on teaching content that we did before, we're teaching history, not geography. You know, so we have to think about how this is affecting our understanding of something like globalization, or our understanding of things like climate change. The weather in London has never been as good as it's been since lockdown. We have unbelievable blue skies every day. I know for you guys in Brazil, blue skies are like nothing and you have blue skies every day. But for us, this is major. This is like really blue skies. It's incredible.
Eu acho que talvez seja interessante, ela falou que o processo seletivo das universidades foi interrompido, né? E o nosso não. E o nosso há no máximo uma sinalização de adiamento, que na real ainda nem se efetivou.
Veja, Maurício, não foi interrompido. Eles não vão fazer o novo exame. Eles vão aproveitar notas, porque eles têm várias notas que são usadas. Eles não têm um Enem.
Eu me expressei mal.
Só para... Vai continuar o fluxo, de outra maneira de aproveitamento de notas e de avançamento de consideração.
Mas mesmo com essa continuidade de fluxo, Naíse, ela fala numa redução do acesso, né?
Sim, mas olha só,
pelos estudantes estrangeiros.
Exato, pode ser que para o meu sobrinho, que é um aluno que não é, né, o the best, ele vai conseguir entrar muito mais rapidamente do que antes, porque ele antes tinha uma concorrência.
Sim.
Exato, estou dizendo assim, lá é muito diferente esse...
completamente diferente.
É
mas mesmo sendo diferente, eu acho que se conecta muito nessa discussão que a gente está entre público e privado, no mercado de educação, porque orienta muito o currículo, orienta muito o trabalho em sala de aula e orienta muito essa questão do, olha, você não pode falar de pandemia, você não pode falar de pandemia, você tem que seguir o currículo, você tem que continuar dando a geografia que vai cair no Enem, né? E a própria coisa de um processo seletivo segmentado, né? Eu esqueci o nome que se dá para isso, mas dividido nessas etapas, mais longo, né? Se dando ao longo dos anos, como eu imagino o seu sistema da Inglaterra, não conheço profundamente, acaba dando um outro tom e uma outra preocupação nesse momento. Então, acho que também é válido investir um pouco nesse caminho aí da conversa com ela.
E também ela fica curiosa de saber, eu acho que vale a pena o Maurício falar do que tem no município, o Enio falar da educação de jovens e adultos, eu acho que deixar o que são as escolas federais.
Eu só queria falar rapidinho sobre a diferença que eu acho que deve ter entre Reino Unido e aqui, que é a questão do governo federal e os governos estaduais e municipais.
Claro, exato. Então, por isso que eu acho que dá um frame, né, de cada instituição escolar para ela ser interessante. Claire?
Sem dúvida.
Sorry.
It's okay.
We are very concerned to share with you our experience, because in Brazil we have different kinds of situations. For example, Maurício work in networking of Rio de Janeiro institutions. Enio work with adult schools, and so different kinds of students too. So, what do you think about? We can share it. Can we share with you our experience now?
Of course, of course.
Pode começar, Enio. O que você acha?
Sim. So, there's a difference, I think, between UK and Brazil, because here the federal government denies the pandemic, as Angelita told us. But the governors of states, no, not necessary. So there are differences between the policies, educational policies, in order, of course, and how to deal with the pandemic, how to deal with the quarantine, with the social distancing. So, for example, here in Rio de Janeiro, the state of Rio de Janeiro, there are policies to deal with the social distance. Okay, but at schools, for example, the department, for example, here in Rio de Janeiro, the department consider the remote place as a school base. You understand? In other states, no. So there are differences between this. And behind this, we realize that there are a lot of pressure from the great companies of communication, for example, technologies of communications, like Google Classroom, from Google, from Microsoft, with now. And I want to hear you about this. How do you think about the role of these companies at this moment? Youth and adult education in Brazil is education for working class, for workers. And the workers here, they are suffering a lot. There are no incomes now. They are sick. Now the COVID-19 is spreading in the favelas, it's spreading in the upper neighborhoods. So we can't talk with them about school now.
Yeah.
We cannot. But at the same time, the teachers in general of youth and adult education, they contacted their students. But it's another kind of contact. It's not to pass contents, school contents. It's to talk with them, to know how, if they need something, of course, school contents as well, but it's not the same thing, for example, for the private school. So in youth and adult education here, we see that they disappear. This modality of education disappear from the policies at this moment. The governments in general don't talk about youth and adult education. So it's invisible to them. But I want to hear about the companies and what is the role of them at this moment in the UK?
It's a really interesting question because initially, so on Twitter, for instance, there were just hundreds of companies giving away free stuff. Okay, so like Zoom, for instance, was giving away free access to Zoom. Google was giving away like Google Classrooms, Google Technology for everything. Lots and lots of companies that were developing and selling resources were giving people free access. And immediately, lots of teachers and schools kind of grabbed everything that they could that was free and started to use it. But then they started to realize that doing that was that they had to sign up for a year, and like the first 3 months were free. So even though it was free, it kind of wasn't really free. And there was a huge backlash from teachers about that. And there was a thing here of naming and shaming companies. So naming and shaming companies who were abusing some of the rules, naming and shaming companies that were trying to get money out of schools, trying to get money out of teachers. And we have this thing, EduTwitter, which is the Twitter education community on Twitter. And they were keeping a list of companies that we won't be supporting when this is over. Companies that when this is gone, they will lose our custom. And then on the other side, there was a list of companies that were doing very good charity work, that were supporting our health workers, supporting teachers, supporting schools. So there was like a good list, like Father Christmas, there was a good list and there was a naughty list. And when this is over, you know, we've said to companies, you want to be on the good list, because if you're on that list, we're not playing with you anymore. Now, what kind of impact that has, I don't know, but I think we have, in terms of our infrastructure, it's quite different here, because schools have a lot of autonomy about what they can use and what they do and what they buy. And we have less of the kind of federal, provincial kind of arrangements that you have, which I think is quite significant. I think that this event, you know, people will have long memories, and this event will affect the long-term reputation of many companies. But again, our situation here, I think, is quite different to yours. It sounds very different.
Some of us are very concerned about that, because we think that these companies, they are preparing the future. Mm-hmm. Teachers, and prepare the schools for this future. And this future will be with technologies of information and communication.
It's rubbish. Technologies. It's rubbish, what? Right? It's rubbish.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, but we're concerned about that, because you know, here the advertisements are very heavy now. Não sei se os colegas concordam, if everybody agree with this, but the advertisement from of this kind of companies are very hard now here.
You know, things will be different, and we will, I think, use technology more in the future. But I think we also, with every trend, there's a counter trend. And with every kind of move towards technology, there's also a move back towards people realizing how important relationships are. People realizing how much they miss face-to-face contact, and how important in teaching particularly that relationship is that you develop when you're in a classroom with somebody, and you don't just see their face, but you feel their energy, and you feel that they seem a little bit miserable today, or they seem in a good mood today. I think people are becoming more and more sensitive to how important those things are. So I do think we will be using, I do think there will be a trend for some more use of technology, but I also think there will be a counter trend that goes back to really appreciating some of those fundamental things about human-to-human contact.
And Claire, in addition to Enio, I suppose that Enio concerns the difference between copyright and copyleft. You know what I mean? It's about how enterprise and the corporation, okay, and create roles and sometimes to impact the teaching traditional, the teaching profiles. That's, I suppose, the huge debate in Brazil. How the corporation impacts, and the question about copyright and copyright left. You know, we need open education. We need free lines about technology, and so the Department of Education in Brazil, you know, they are a conservative government, are concerned about the components, not about the people or open education and copyleft.
Yeah.
So that's the point.
But our governments don't decide everything, you know, and unfortunately they do fund stuff, which is kind of important, but they don't decide everything. And what governments want to happen and what actually happens are often two separate things. So you've got to bear in mind, there's still the power of the people, and there's still the power of what people want and what people need. And that's important to bear in mind, that kind of our own power and our own agency in this, and what we can and what we can't do. And we don't have to accept the things that are given to us.
Okay.
And Claire, also about this concern that we have, and we are passing through a moment, we changing the laws about education. And those laws are adding, think about the virtual education. I believe that part because of this, we are trying to understand how UK are conducting this education at home. Because Enio said that we are concerned with the jobs of the professors and the model of school that we are constructing for the future. So if you say something about this.
Yeah, sure. We've been playing with online learning, distance learning, virtual learning for about 20 years. And one of the things that I've learned personally is that you can't take a face-to-face course program and move it online without fundamentally changing that program. And some things do that really well. So some areas work really well with that, and some work much less well. I always like the example of tattooing. Okay, it's really difficult to teach tattooing virtually. Okay, you kind of have to be there. It isn't the answer, but it's an answer, but probably an answer to a different question. So one of the things that I've been really conscious of in my contacts with teachers and schools is they're learning those things really, really quickly. And we've had schools that have tried to move everything online kind of overnight. And we've had a lot of teachers do lessons like this, where there's a group in a class and the teacher's talking, and they're trying to recreate a classroom within a virtual space. Or they've been pre-recording a lecture or a lesson and putting it on YouTube, and then the students are downloading it when they're able to, and what have you. And what has happened over our period of 10 weeks is that actually our teachers are using technology less than they were at the beginning, but they're using it in a much more intelligent way. So what they're doing is they're making decisions about, this is what I want my children to learn today, and this is the best way for them to do it under the current circumstances. So it might be I get them to watch something that was on TV, or I get them to watch something that's on, that they have access to. I might give them an activity to do with their family. We've been talking a lot about early childhood education and using things in the kitchen. Using different things in the kitchen to help children learn about colour and to learn about shape. And actually, sometimes kids really want to hear their teacher, particularly primary school kids, really want to hear their teacher read them a story. And that can be done really well with video technology. But other things, and I'm not sure many primary schools are teaching tattooing, but but tattooing would be a terrible thing to teach with technology.
I'm working for the how can I say, the local education from Rio de Janeiro. Mm-hmm. Okay, but I'm a professor, but I work with the manager of the public education. You understand?
Yeah.
Okay, and we take 2 months to begin to teaching the teachers to use the technology. So you talk about 10 weeks, and only in the last 2, we're beginning to in a partner with the Microsoft Teams. The Rio de Janeiro already had this contract with the Microsoft, but we took 8 weeks to begin to inform the teachers that they can use and how to use. Mm-hmm. And some time ago, we were talking about the difference between the private schools and the public schools. And one of these differences are the time of the things happens between the private and the public schools.
We have a different situation here. So the Prime Minister announced that when schools close their doors on the Friday, they won't be reopening except for children of key workers. So our teachers had to be ready to teach on Monday, and they had 3 days to prepare whilst they still had classes. So there was no preparatory time for our teachers. They literally had to learn on the job. And now that was the case with our public schools, with our state schools. Our private schools, and this is really interesting because our private schools are in a much worse situation, because our private schools rely on income from fees, and a lot of people are refusing to pay fees if their child is not getting the right education. A lot of people are saying that they are removing their children because they're worried about their own jobs. So they're removing their children from private education because they know they can put them into state education, that's fine. I saw a newspaper report today that they estimate something like 30% of our private schools will close. And they had to move really quickly. That I don't think has necessarily been a good thing, because what it's meant is that it's been done really badly, but it meant that the teachers had to do it quickly. And we haven't had, there's been a lot of online courses for teachers. Here's some help how to do it online. Here are some tips. Here's, 5 ways to teach your class online. There's been a lot of that stuff on social media. Very few formal courses to support teachers, and an awful lot of teachers helping teachers. Teachers saying, I did this, I did that, and that's how it's been done. It's been much less organized in the way that you've described it.
So I think we must continue this conversation, but today I think we have to quit, and it's lunchtime in Brazil.
And it's tea time in London. hey, I might go and have a caipirinha.
Okay.
That's Claire.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Claire.
Thank you. Bye.